"Oh, Daniel, what a surprise!" exclaimed Jacob joyfully, accidentally bumping into his old good friend on the street. "It's been years. We haven't seen each other since you left. You've become quite the city man, haven't you? Trading me for the big city life. Can't even find words to say. You disappoint me. Could have, by the way, visited every year. As you can see, we have a lot to share and show. Maybe you regret leaving your hometown once you witness all its beauty. I stayed. I'm working as the deputy head of the factory. And you? Come on, tell me. I'm genuinely curious about how your life turned out. Come over for tea, we'll talk. I won't introduce you to the family again. You know my daughter since the first grade, but I'll show you my sons. They've grown into fine young men. I made it clear to them right away not to think about city fuss and dismiss any thoughts of moving. We need to revive our native lands, work for their benefit, not serve some wealthy city folks. Daniel was shocked by how much his hometown had changed since he left for the big city 17 years ago. He couldn't have imagined that a group of wealthy people deciding to build a cottage settlement in a forgotten place could have such an impact on the development of an old and seemingly hopeless village. Back in his youth, he thought there were no prospects here. Since school, he aimed to achieve something in life, ignoring his father's pleas and his mother's lamentations, leaving as soon as he got his diploma. "Son, please be careful there," Betty would say when she saw Daniel off to the train. After all, the big city is a completely different world, a different life. Don't get lost there. He didn't get lost and managed to achieve everything he wanted. Higher education, working 24 hours a day paid off. By the age of 30, Daniel held a managerial position in a large company, and by 35, he could start his own business. He was so proud of himself. So proud that he occasionally forgot about visiting his mother and father at the cemetery, who passed away a few years ago, a year apart. He attended the funerals, but bid them farewell quite indifferently. There was no time to do things in a humane way. And for what? Besides him, his parents had no other relatives, and a modest grave was sufficient for him. The main thing was to always have a place to bring flowers, sweets, sit, remember, and have a heartfelt conversation. In the hustle of daily affairs, the man had no time for emotions, and his age was catching up. After all, he wasn't as young anymore. He hadn't married yet. He had no heirs, no one to pass the business to when he departs from all this hustle to the other side. It bothered Daniel, who yearned for simple family happiness. While striving for success and overcoming obstacles in his path, he didn't think about it. And now, when he had everything and he prospered for several years, the need for a family was felt particularly keenly. You need a young wife, laughed friends with whom Daniel occasionally drank spirits by his home fireplace. In their conversations, the men only shared how their children settled in life, where they studied and worked, and Daniel had nothing to say. He remained silent and listened all the time. What could he talk about? How to participate in a conversation when you have none of these things, and maybe he never will? This thought terrified him to the core. How he wished to meet that one, ready to give him a home, for he was a solid man with a decent capital. Seeing the beauty Elizabeth at one of the social events, Daniel couldn't pass by. That evening, he wasn't too sober, but not drunk enough not to be aware of his actions. She was young enough to still have the opportunity to become a mother, but not too young to cause laughter from his business partners and friends when he introduced her as his fiancée. The woman was clearly not a miss. In a matter of minutes, she found numerous common topics for conversation with the educated and well-read Daniel. Their relationship developed swiftly. Beautiful courtship, expensive gifts, everything as it should be. And now, after several months, the day came when the man was ready to propose to his beloved. Waiting for her consent didn't take long. Elizabeth often thought that she was no longer 20 and decent men were not to be thrown away. Daniel was an ideal candidate for the role of a husband and father, but she didn't want children at all. And if she took marriage positively, immediately accepting the man's proposal, when it came to heirs, Elizabeth became wary. "I would really like our views on this matter to align," said Daniel, who had never openly talked about children before. "I'm not young anymore, and I would like to spend quality time with sons and daughters, not to mention grandchildren." In response, Elizabeth simply nodded, pretending to share Daniel's desire. What sense was there in opposing him? Dear viewer, before I continue, I ask you to subscribe to my channel. It is very important to me. Arguing, quarreling? Why bother? It wouldn't lead to anything good, especially since she could easily control this matter. Throughout Elizabeth's life, there hadn't been a single health issue. Surely her future husband wouldn't really take her to doctors and peek into every woman's office to get confirmation that she was healthy. Time passed, and they couldn't seem to have children, although there were no obstacles. But that's nonsense, Elizabeth reassured herself, fully preparing for the wedding. She was sure the ceremony would be luxurious, but Daniel wasn't too interested in that. He would prefer a calm, cozy, and family celebration. And of course, he had to show his beloved his hometown, where he was born, spent his childhood and youth, where his parents were buried. She must be interested. That's what he thought. But Elizabeth once again did not share his views and reluctantly accepted the necessity of the trip, which brought her absolutely no pleasure. There are many interesting places here, Daniel exclaimed when they arrived in the village. He immediately noticed that his beloved was not thrilled about having to live in a small wooden house that the businessman inherited after his parents' death for a whole week. Since then, he never thought about what to do with this house. Only when he returned to his hometown did he start thinking about demolishing the old house and building a huge country house in its place. How about this idea? The man asked his beloved. But the woman was clearly thinking about something else. She was obviously not in the mood for that. Okay, get ready. Let's go for a walk. Daniel continued, and half an hour later, they were walking through the old streets. Since then, those old places had transformed a lot, but they had forever imprinted in the man's memory in their original form, as they were many years ago when he, still a boy, ran around them with his friends. Meeting Jacob was a complete surprise for him. He hadn't seen his friend since they bid farewell before his departure to the big city. There wasn't even time to visit, inquire, and find out how the fate of his good friend from his youth turned out. And here he suddenly became so mature, so much grown up. In Daniel's memory, Jacob always remained small, and at that moment, he was facing an adult, an accomplished man. How quickly time flew, just like life. Hearing about Jacob's sons, whom he talked about with undisguised enthusiasm, Daniel once again thought about children. The man's heart tightened, and out of his contemplation, Elizabeth's voice brought him, who, noticing a local beauty salon on the other side of the street, informed her future husband that she wanted to go there. Interesting, she said thoughtfully. I want to see what's there. We have everything not worse than in your city. Jacob assured Daniel, who hadn't learned the name of his youth friend's companion. It was evident that the man really wanted Elizabeth to leave. He needed to ask his friend about something important, something he could only say to him privately. Sure, go ahead, dear, Daniel said. When you're done, you can come straight back to our little house. And if you get lost, just call. Although, I don't think you'll get lost here. Where is there to get lost? After kissing Daniel on the cheek, Elizabeth crossed the road, and a few minutes later, she disappeared behind the salon doors. Jacob and Daniel were finally alone, and he could ask his friend the question he wanted, but was afraid to voice in front of a woman. Clearly, he didn't come just for company. Have you visited Veronica? Have you been in touch with her since you left? I'm out of the loop. You're still mysterious and unapproachable. I haven't seen you in 100 years, but you should have seen her. The friend's question left Daniel at a loss, and suddenly he realized that for all these years, he had never met with the girl he once loved so much. And now, if Jacob hadn't made him remember her, Daniel wouldn't have pulled out the period of his life connected with her from his memory. He felt ashamed, terribly ashamed, for not being able to tell the truth, for leaving without saying goodbye, for not coming back for her, for not calling once. And from this feeling of shame, he tried to hide and escape. All those long years spent in the urban environment, leaving not only his hometown, but also people who genuinely loved him and were devoted to him. His relationship with Veronica was like a true fairy tale. First love, first emotions, and first heartaches. Daniel never expected it to last long and didn't give Veronica any hope. From his perspective, it looked that way. But she was convinced that he was the only person with whom she wanted to tie her destiny, and she was ready to believe anything just to prove her cautious mother, who also remained alone with a child in her arms, wrong. You're still young and foolish. Zoya sternly scolded her daughter when she didn't spend the night at home once again. He doesn't care, but you, my dear, could find yourself in a very difficult life situation, and you might not be able to find a way out for many years if you ever manage to do so. But to a young and in love girl, the mother's words meant nothing. Could an inexperienced and sorrow-touched woman convince her daughter to be cautious and not rush to trust her lover ahead of time? No, she couldn't. No one could do that. Daniel was too focused on his own goals. After making all those promises to himself, he couldn't go back to the poverty he dreamed of escaping. After the move, he was no longer interested in anything other than a prosperous future. Over time, Veronica, whom he missed for a while, vanished from his memory, leaving only a pleasant echo of the past life. Why didn't he take her with him? And where to? To a cramped room where they had to live together. What could he give her? And when he could, it was already too late to change anything. Are you sure it's appropriate? He asked Jacob. So many years have passed, and she probably doesn't want to see me. You probably know how we parted ways. I didn't even talk to her, didn't discuss, didn't say the most important thing, and I couldn't do it. What should I have told her? That I left, and nothing interests me except my bright future. I wouldn't be able to say that. And now what? She probably got married and forgot my name. Why should I go to her? What will I say to her? How can I even look her in the eyes after everything? Listen to me, Jacob replied seriously. Just like she didn't tell you the most important thing back then, you must go to her and talk to her now. Trust me. Besides, you're already here anyway. Elizabeth is exploring salons and local surroundings. You have plenty of time. Go to Veronica. You'll thank me later. The address is the same. I hope you remember it. How could he forget? Veronica lived with her mother in a similarly small house, just like he did with his family back then, only in a different part of the village. He remembered the way there, and on the way, he pondered how banal and dull life is without money. Yes, over the years, the village has undergone significant changes, and life in it has become less hopeless. But can it be compared to the urban environment? And the local residents didn't exactly live prosperously. They had employment, and that was about it. The conditions remained the same. In all this, not only survive, but also raise children. It's good that he left when he did, made the decision, and didn't hesitate. He wouldn't have been able to live like that. Ambitions wouldn't allow it. He would have regretted not telling the truth for his entire life, regretted leaving without saying goodbye, regretted not going back for Veronica, regretted never calling. And from this sense of shame, he tried to escape and hide all those long years spent in the urban environment, leaving not only his native village, but also the people who sincerely loved and were devoted to him. He thought he had succeeded, was even sure for a while, and now realized that no, it's still shameful, and there's nowhere to escape from this exhausting and internally scorching feeling. Back then, his relationship with Veronica was like a true fairy tale. First love, first emotions, and first heartaches. Daniel never expected it to last long and didn't give Veronica any hope. She was convinced that he was the only person with whom she wanted to tie her destiny, and she was ready to believe anything just to prove her cautious mother, who also remained alone with a child in her arms, wrong. And in a moment, Daniel was already standing at the threshold of Veronica's house. "Who are you looking for?" the girl asked, opening the door after a brief knock, and upon seeing her, the man froze in place. "This just can't be," flashed in his mind. The stranger was greatly surprised by the man's silence, and trying to bring him to his senses, she began shaking his hand. "Sir, what's wrong with you?" she asked. "Are you looking for someone or lost? Maybe I can help you." Daniel mumbled something incomprehensible. He continued to stand in the doorway and carefully examined the girl, who was not at all embarrassed by his intense gaze or the fact that he was squeezing her hand in his. Only after a few moments did he come to his senses and dared to ask the stranger's name. "My name is Nastya," the girl replied. "Nastya. And you, apparently, are not local. So what did you want?" "Veronica used to live in this house. We were old acquaintances, and I, not local, you're not mistaken," said the man. "I came to my native village for a few days and would really like to meet Veronica. Did she move?" His voice sounded so bewildered and uncertain that the man was surprised at himself. Never in his life had he felt so lost. There were many questions, but only Veronica could provide the answers. But will she want to talk to him? And what if she doesn't come back? These thoughts haunted him, and he almost got lost in them after hearing the girl's response. She informed him that his mother had gone to a neighboring village to visit a close friend who had invited her to her daughter's birthday. Since Anastasia had never been friends with the birthday girl, she decided to stay home and continue preparing for the upcoming graduation exams, which were just around the corner. "No, she'll be back soon," reassured the girl. "If you want, you can wait for her. I'll treat you to tea." Amazing, Daniel thought to himself. Over the years, he had become accustomed to city life and was initially surprised that the girl casually let a stranger into her house without any fear. However, after a few minutes, he came back to reality and remembered that in the village, people readily opened their doors to neighbors and guests. How much his perceptions had changed over the years. Despite his initial surprise, Daniel, overcoming his discomfort, agreed to have a cup of tea with her. He could have spent as much time as possible just sitting there, casually, with a cup of hot aromatic tea, but their conversation was interrupted by a sudden phone call. "Daniel, I'm urgently coming to you. Even though you asked me not to accompany you, this is an urgent matter. There is neither time nor opportunity to wait for your return to the city. It could have very unfavorable consequences." Sergei's voice was very stern, and Daniel immediately understood that something had happened. He wouldn't have bothered him for no reason. Over the years of loyal and dedicated service, the head of the security service had proven himself to be an excellent specialist. Sergei had repeatedly provided assistance to Daniel in the most complex and unforeseen situations, always timely informing him of threats to the company and carefully tracking all incoming risks. This time was no exception. As soon as Sergei crossed the threshold of the house, he immediately placed an envelope with photos in front of Daniel. Upon opening it, Daniel saw his Elizabeth next to the head of one of the competitor firms. "What is this?" he asked sternly, looking into Elizabeth's eyes. She couldn't find words to answer Daniel, as she didn't expect Sergei's arrival or him finding this information. "So you're not just cheating on me, but hanging out with someone who should have been sent to prison a long time ago. Do you know that all his ideas and developments are stolen? He has more claims against him than you have hairs on your head." It began to dawn on him that the woman had targeted him not just randomly. Right around the time he met Elizabeth, Daniel started collaborating with new investors. "If she became my wife, she would not only have access to my accounts, but also the opportunity to get half my company and all assets in case of divorce." He pondered thoughtfully after the scandal when he kicked Elizabeth out of his house. "This is what I'm telling you," exclaimed Sergei, sincerely glad that he could timely help his boss. "I've been monitoring her for a long time. I don't know how it happened. She seemed suspicious to me from the very beginning, and something alarmed me. As soon as they put these photos on my desk, I rushed here immediately. What was I afraid of? That you left to celebrate your wedding. Well, who knows, maybe you wanted to celebrate the wedding just the two of you without any luxury, and then, upon your return, celebrate on a grand scale. I didn't know your plans," Sergei said. Elizabeth, despite fussing about the restaurant and expensive gifts, never set a date for the ceremony. Once again, thanking Sergei for his faithful service, Daniel immersed himself in his thoughts. At that moment, he couldn't think about anything or anyone else but Veronica and Nastia. He visited his first wife's house the next day, and when she saw him at the door, she was stunned. "Is that really you?" she whispered, looking into Daniel's eyes. Nastia came out of the room at that moment, greeted the man, and immediately left the house, causing even greater surprise to Veronica. "And you?" She hesitated. "Do you know each other?" Various thoughts, including dreadful ones, raced through her mind, but seeing concern on Veronica's face, Daniel quickly reassured her that it was not what she thought. They needed to talk. She had been waiting for this conversation for so many years, even though she was uncertain if it would ever happen. "Yes, you understood everything correctly," Veronica said when Daniel asked her the question that deeply concerned him. "Nastia is your daughter. It was my decision to leave her. Her mother was vehemently against it, insisting that I get rid of the child, blaming me for all mortal sins, calling me names with her last words. But why talk about it now? Her mother has been gone for a long time. It's not for me to judge her." Daniel once again felt not only acute guilt, but also nostalgia. What a fool he had been. How could he have acted this way? If only he had known, he would have certainly corrected everything, but it was already too late to change anything. Veronica never blamed him for anything. On the contrary, she was grateful for the time they spent together and for the daughter he gave her. She never loved anyone else and saw the whole meaning of her life only in Nastya, her beloved daughter. How sad that our parents didn't live to see this day. Daniel mused while sitting in the cemetery next to his newlywed wife. They would have been happy for us, for our happiness. Veronica only nodded in response, agreeing with her husband in everything. She loved him so much that neither time, nor distance, nor the fact that many years ago he left her to the mercy of fate prevented her from forgiving him and letting him back into her life. Daniel, on the other hand, was infinitely grateful to her for this and could never understand how he had lived without her, without his true beloved woman, all these years. That's the story. Write your opinion in the comments. Also subscribe to the channel and watch the next videos.